Welcome, everyone, to the Meaningful Hearts podcast, where we discuss the everyday questions that make us or break us if we let them. With your hosts, Drew and Daniela. Take our hands and let's walk this journey together.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Meaningful Hearts podcast. We are back together again.
Boom, boom.
Today, we are going to talk about compounding thoughts. What are they? What do they look like? And how do they present themselves to us? And how are they different? So I would love to start off by asking Drew to share his experience with his compounding thoughts. And then I will go into sharing my experience with compounding thoughts, and we'll just have a conversation about it. Does that sound good?
Yes.
Okay, take it away.
Compounding thoughts for me are like an onion. There's many layers to them. And to the core of it is the real issue, I guess, that I'm experiencing or have experienced. And then when something triggers that, anything that happens to happen after that thought, it adds to those layers. I guess it adds to the core and it stacks up. So if I'm having a bad day, the root cause that's actually the way I'm feeling is really the thought about how I'm feeling about what I have to do that day. So anything that happens to go wrong just adds to that, I guess, layers itself on top of that and causes me to spiral into having a really terrible day. Well, that's the best way I can explain it.
Can you give an example?
Well, if I'm stressed about work, or I'm stressed about maybe not being able to work out or get to the gym, and I haven't gone for a couple of days, and then I guess something happens that day. It makes me think about how, I guess I always root back to the things that I'm already having issues with, like not being able to go to the gym, and I have to get to the gym today. And if I miss today, then I miss the next day, and how I'm feeling about myself already is bad. And it might not necessarily have to do anything with working out, but feeling bad always works complementary with other things that make you feel bad. So they don't have to be related, but they just add on to the laundry list of things that make you feel bad and make you feel like you're behind. So for me, those things really weigh on me.
I see. So it sounds like your compounding thoughts are more likely to happen when you're under stress.
Yes, I would say, or things that could possibly cause me stress. But yes, if I'm on a constant level of stress at that point, it's even easier to fall into that trap because you're vulnerable. You're not feeling your greatest. You're not in the best headspace. So you start to bring in other things that add to your stress or not good qualities about you that are weak spots, I guess, in who you are, and makes you feel even worse. And then you start to compound on those things. So you go from, I'm having a bad day, things are going on at work that are pretty stressful, and I feel behind. And then you think about other things that you're behind on that don't have to do with work. And you think about all these other things, and it just becomes like these little trees that have branches and sub branches and branches off of that. And then you feel like the weight of the world is on your shoulders, and you're like shackled down in a sea of disparity.
Excuse me.
She must have had some lunch or dinner or something.
I was just drinking water, and then I don't know, I got caught. But I can definitely understand, and I think to some extent I can relate, and I think our listeners can relate, is that when you're under stress, and there's that old, I don't know if it's old or I don't know where it comes from, but misery loves company, right? So when one bad thing happens, it usually happens like that. When it rains, it pours, like those kind of very cliche things. When we're under stress, or when we are feeling like we messed up something, or when we're having trouble figuring something out, all these other things start to happen that start to play into the way that we're thinking. All of a sudden, now we're realizing, oh man, I have to do this, and I feel like this, and what's that thing on my face, and I don't like my body, and I don't like my appearance, and all of these things do definitely start to compound. I'm curious.
For you, are you talking about things that you go through? Because we went through my stuff. Oh, okay.
No, I just mean like it's relatable in general. Different variations of that. When we're under stress, we're more likely to notice the things that we don't like about ourselves. That's what I was hearing from you. Like if you're stressed about work, or if you're stressed about not going to the gym, and then things happen, then you're more likely to be self-critical of yourself. And I think that people can really relate to that. I can relate to some extent. My compounding thoughts are a little bit different, which I'll get to in a second. But I'm curious as to your experience with compounding thoughts when you're not necessarily under stress. What's that like? Do they ever happen when you're not under stress? I can actually, let me just be a little bit more direct with you. Tell me about...
Stop beating around the bush.
I know. Tell me about what happens to you, babe, when you and I are hanging out and I say, let's go do this, and you're not fully prepared. What goes through your mind, and in what ways do your thoughts compound then? Because I know they do.
Or what tasks are involved to get me ready to do that thing? It depends on what it is. Sometimes I just don't want to. I would say maybe there's times when I'm just like, I don't really want to do that. And then I don't want to say no, because at the same time, I don't want to be a spoiled, not a spoiled sport, but what would be the best? A wet blanket, right?
Debbie Downer.
Yeah. So I don't want to be that way. So then I'm gotta pull myself up and say, sometimes it's more or less, is it that I don't want to do it, or is it I don't want to prepare myself to do that task or whatever that is? Because you on a whim will do a very complex thing in my eyes. And it's like, no, I'm not going to, in a moment's notice, go do that. It's not built in. You know, you'll do 4 or 5 different things that are like, you'll go to the city and then you'll go to Jersey. You're like, yeah, I'll go to this game for 10 minutes. That's in the city. And then I'll go all the way over. I'm like, no, I won't do that. Nope. I'll just go to one thing and that'll be fine. But for you, it's just like, yeah, I'll just go do it on a whim. And it's like, I don't work that. I don't operate that way.
Yeah.
I guess I could, but it would just be, I'd be miserable. And you're just more of on a whim.
Yeah.
And I
am.
It's a lot.
With some things, I am. You know, I think one of the things that why I asked the question is because I know you and I have had this conversation, not like in a redundant way, but we try to explore what's happening. I think, and I've realized actually that it's come up in my work with my clients when somebody is or operates on a higher level of anxiety. You know, I know, for example, some people, when it comes to parking, I know that's something that you experience too. When we think about going somewhere, you're already thinking about where you're going to park. If it's going to be hard, how far are we going to have to park? You know, is it close to the place? What's the traffic going to look like? And I don't have those type of compounding thoughts, but I know you do. And I think there are people who can relate to your experience. That's where my mind was going.
Yeah, I'll just go to the easiest solution. I'm like, well, just take an Uber
and
there.
I'm like, no.
Well, I like, it's too much. Like, that's just way too much. I don't mind doing it, but the effort that would be required to drive there is just not worth it.
Versus for me, I'm like, oh my God, we're taking an Uber. Why would we take an Uber when we have a car? Why would we spend money? And then that's where things start to compound for me, because I'm very money conscious, you know, based on experience of having to live on a very tight budget. So when you say things like, oh, we'll just pay an Uber. And I'm like, Uber's like $40. I don't want to do that. And then I have all these scenarios about what I could be doing with those $40 instead.
Like, I would hop on a train and go there, and then we'll just Uber it back. Like, we don't have to go Uber both ways. But the fact of just being able to get to where to be accessible for us without having to worry about all the other stuff, there's some scenarios where it's just practical to do that. in my eyes. And there are times where, listen, we have to find parking. It's cool, but sometimes it's just like, I don't really want to deal with, because it is a lot sometimes going places
Sure.
and worrying about parking and dealing with the cluster of cars and all the crap that goes on, just dealing with people in general. Sometimes it's overwhelming. It's like, do I want to really do this today? I want to, but I don't want to have to worry about all. I'd rather just hand that job off to somebody else.
Yeah. See, on that aspect, I'm just like, it's an adventure. Why not? So my compounding thoughts are a little bit different. You know, I can relate to some of what you shared, but I think for me, I think my compounding thoughts mainly start with something that I have to do either with work or personal development of myself. Like, I like to watch seminars and do workshops, and I love to take notes, but then I also have work that I have to do. So I'll think about, okay, I have to do this note. And then I'm like, okay, but I have to do 5 other notes. And then I'm like, but I have that seminar that I have to do. And then things just kind of like spiral from there. And then I get overwhelmed and I'm like, oh man, like this is just way, way, way too much. My experience is different with compounding thoughts from what you were sharing, is that my compounding thoughts are tied to compounding feelings. So like I'll start off with, if I'm upset about something or if something happens that it doesn't leave me feeling the greatest, then I start to kind of spiral emotionally first, and then it's connected to the thoughts in that sense of like, I'll have a feeling of like, man, I feel guilty about this. And then I'm like, okay, but these are all the other things that I also feel guilty about. And then what thoughts come with that feeling of guilt and how can I work through that? Something that happened to me recently was I was thinking about how can I help the place where I work grow? And I went into like this spiral of thoughts of what would need to happen for the employees to make more money, for example. And then I was like, okay, well, what would need to happen for, us to grow as a business? Can it be individual things? Can we do more groups? Can we do more workshops? Can we do retreats? Like I started to think about all of these things. And in a moment, I was so overwhelmed. I was like, oh my God, that feels like such an impossible task. Which, reflecting on the things that you want to do and how you want to grow, is a really good thing. But even those things can bring about a lot of compounding thoughts. Did I make sense? I think I did, but I'm not sure.
Yes, because you lose control at a certain point. It becomes, you welcome the ideas, and then when you're like carrying all these ideas around with you in your arms, like, whoa, that's a lot. Oh, that's like I went down this rabbit hole that I don't want to be on anymore, and it's too out of control.
Yeah.
It's a lot. It's a lot to deal with.
Yeah, it definitely is.
I think we don't realize how much weight we carry on ourselves or how many thoughts we have in a day. If we had a calendar to tell us exactly how many things we've went through in our minds on a daily basis, like we can look at how many hours we spent on a cell phone in a certain application, it wouldn't really compute for us until we saw it. And we're like, oh man.
Yeah. You know, what's interesting is that as you were starting to respond, in my head, I was also thinking there's a lot of compounding thoughts and feelings that come from the way that we interact with our phones as well. I know that, there's controversy between whether it's social media and technology that's the bad thing, or it's the way that people use these things that's the bad thing. And I think that it's a little bit of both. Social media is the temptation, but the person does have a choice until they don't have a choice and they just realize that they spent the last hour scrolling through TikTok. And even that creates a sense of compounding feelings and thoughts, because I know I've had conversations with people where they'll tell me, I just spent an hour scrolling on TikTok, and the only thing that I feel is I feel left out, or I feel like I'm comparing myself, or I feel like I'm not enough, or what am I doing? And even that plays a role in compounding thoughts. So that was based off what you just said.
Yeah. I think that at times we don't realize how extreme of a thought pattern or process we have.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't realize how much is going on. So when we do have issues, or we feel restless, or we feel exhausted, our mind really burns a lot.
Yeah.
Our mind burns and takes a lot of energy. The human brain takes a lot, right, to process. And this computer's on fire. There are times where we leave work or we leave something and we're just so burnt out and we just need rest. We don't realize it. And I would say a good portion of us don't actually give our body the energy it needs on top of that. So a poor diet on top of a stressful schedule on top of all these other things creates a lot of chaos inside of us, and we don't realize what we put ourselves through.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's interesting to be having a conversation about compounding thoughts, and yet all these other factors play into it as well, which can also be very overwhelming. And I thought it was good to share our experiences because compounding thoughts and feelings and emotions look different for everybody. But I think one of the similarities, I guess, is in figuring out how we can manage them. I think for me personally, one thing that works when I'm feeling overwhelmed by my thoughts is taking a moment to actually recognize and identify, oh, I'm thinking a lot right now. I don't know if that's something that helps you or that you do, but if it is, I think we share that. If we don't, then maybe not so similar, I guess. I don't know. Compounding thoughts.
I think that we have ways of dealing with our thoughts. I don't know if they're all healthy or they're all proper.
How do you deal with the compounding thoughts when you're feeling overwhelmed?
I just hide. No. I try to battle them, right? I would say depending on how overwhelming it is, sometimes I need to shut the switch off and give myself a moment to really just take it all in and to understand what I'm dealing with. And maybe I'll have I'll indulge in some food, kind of watch a movie, something to put myself in a better spirit, kind of just chill out a little bit and then revisit it at a later time, not like weeks later, but maybe the next day or later that night, because sometimes you need to just a cool off time.
Yeah.
I'm not saying bury your head in the sand and never deal with it and just keep indulging other stuff and running away from your problems. That's not what I'm saying. But it's okay to check out for a moment, get a hold of yourself, and then go back to it with the right attitude. Because in the height of hysteria, the height of anger, or the height of feeling frustrated, you might say or do the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Something you might regret. So that's my coping mechanism, and it's worked pretty well because I've come back to things that I thought it's pretty much over. There's an end to it. I need to do something drastic. But when we make decisions in the height of emotion, we make poor decisions, and we're not hanging on the same emotions an hour later.
Yes,
we're a little more level-headed.
Sure.
Something that I've learned through time. It didn't happen overnight, but that's. It's okay to coddle yourself a little bit as long as you're going to go back to the problem and fix it.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good feedback, and similar to what I was saying is part of working through compounding thoughts is recognizing when you're having them and becoming aware, and then consciously taking a moment to say, okay, this is a lot right now. What can I handle right now, and what can be handled later? And I think it's a good start for people who are wondering, okay, I have all of these thoughts, I can relate, but what do I do with it? So to start to wrap up this segment on thoughts, Drew smiling at me. I just wanted to leave our listeners with some questions to think about, kind of like summarizing what we've talked about. So first, it's about recognizing or understanding, do you know what compounding thoughts are? Then it's also about understanding, when are they more likely to happen? Are there any patterns when they're happening, or are they happening at random? And can you increase your awareness as to when you're when you have a higher predisposition to experience them. And then the last part is how to take some moments to figure out how to manage them. So 3 things, I think, is a good summary of what we talked about. What do you think?
I believe so. We don't want to overwhelm our listeners either.
So I hope that was helpful. Is there anything that you want to add before we conclude?
I don't think I have said this enough, even though I say it often, I guess, in certain scenarios. But this is a work in progress.
For sure.
You're not going to solve these issues overnight. This is be forgiving to yourself and understand that if it takes you more time to process things and you're still holding off on problems and issues that you've had in your past and you're trying to address them, you just don't know how. This is a good time to revisit them maybe and see if you can work through it. But by all means, there's no right or wrong way to go about things. This is just our approach.
No, thanks for adding that. With that being said, thank you all so much for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.